Sitecore Experienced, Episode 1, recorded February 18th and February 21st, 2015.
Welcome to Sitecore Experience.
Sitecore Experienced, a video podcast to showcase information related to Sitecore for the benefit of the Sitecore community.
Thank you for joining us today. You're watching Sitecore Experienced, a podcast dedicated to the Sitecore community and what's going on. I'm one co-host of the podcast, Jamie Stump. My partner in crime here needs no introduction, but I'll let him have one anyway.
I'm Mark Survey. I'm the other co-host of Sitecore Experienced. And what we've wanted to really put together here for the community is just another channel to share information and to highlight, people that are doing Sitecore work, things that are going on in the Sitecore community. And so we just have a little bit more visibility and, share that experience, right? So that's why we had this idea for a while. The timing is right for us to put this together, and we're really hoping you're going to enjoy what's going to be coming out of these, out of the series, really.
Absolutely. Today we've got a really exciting show for you. Kam Figy of ISITE Design is going to be our very first guest. We thank him for being our guinea pig, and he's going to be talking to us about Synthesis, a product he puts out that is really exciting. He actually released a new version of it this week, and he's going to be showing us how to install it, why we'd use it, and what the benefits are, and we look really forward to that.
Yeah, Cam's always a good time. We really enjoy talking to Kam. He's a great first guest for us. So it's going to be fun. It's relaxed. Grab your favorite cocktail. If you don't want your favorite cocktail, just kind of kick back and enjoy the ride. This is going to be a bit of a longer than normal episode that we would normally do. Kam is showing us quite a bit of information. And honestly, we've had a lot go on in the Sitecore community in the last couple of months. So
plus, it's our inaugural episode, and we really wanted to, go big or go home, right?
Yeah, we definitely went big this time, which is cool. And,
we're both home, too.
We're both home, yeah. So we're kind of big and home. Home and big.
Did you just call me fat?
No, I didn't. I called me fat.
Okay.
The camera adds 100 pounds.
We'll just keep telling ourselves that, right?
Yeah,
it's the camera's fault.
Yeah, it's not the lack of treadmill or exercise on my part. So
how are things up there in the north?
Cold, man. I'm tired of it. It's like almost March, right? Why is it cold? Why does this have to happen?
I don't know, but it is not happening in San Diego, and I do not miss the cold.
So we had a little snow and cold yesterday. A lot of viewers know we were doing a recording really late last night with Kam.
Yes,
that'll be put into this. So we don't do these things in order because that would be too logical. So we try to split it up and do what we can. So, but yeah, there's a little snow, a little cold. 22 degrees below zero on one of these past nights. Oh yeah, it was great. It's that swimming weather. You go out and you dive in and have a good time.
Well, conversely,
I spent this morning putting patio furniture together in the 70-degree sun.
I don't like the patio furniture thing. Just get a hammock and just lay out there, man. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, the backyard doesn't have trees right now, but a hammock would be really nice.
Well, you can get one of those stands. Just make sure that you don't fall off.
Next time.
I always fall out of those things. So
but
cool, man.
It's not because you're too big.
No, it's just because I'm an idiot. That's why I keep falling out of those things. I'm an idiot. We'll just call it what it is, and we'll find that out when we keep going in here. But I'm a lovable idiot, or something like that.
Something like that.
That's why I got married, because I'm a lovable idiot.
All right, let's get the people to Sitecore. That's what they're here to see.
They're not here to listen about my crap. All right, let's go. All right, so as we were putting together the podcast episode here, there's a lot of things that have been happening in the last couple of months. Too much to probably cover here, unfortunately. So some of the highlights we took away from some of the community postings. One that stuck out for me was the Sitecore integration documentation reminder from Adam Kahn. If you guys go out to the Learn blogs, technical blogs, their posts, you'll get to read this. And this is really talking about the Sitecore community docs and really what's out there and a lot of the different topics put together for that documentation. So you can see the topics down here from asynchronous tasks, dependency injection, logging, patch files, and settings, and a whole bunch of things in between. So definitely worth the look at. For another one that stuck out, there's a great couple of posts, a part 1 and a part 2 so far, of zero downtime Sitecore deployments. If I could say that correctly, to be awesome. So the cool thing I really liked about these is really there's an architecture overview in part 1, you know, deployments, CD server, you know, just basically setting up and getting that down. Part 2 has to deal with essentially search and a little tidbit of solar on here. We've all had to do deployments. We've all, you know, had different varying deployments of having to bring Sitecore down to not bringing Sitecore down. I think this is a pretty good overall read. And you can see right there, you can see the words not Lucene. So right there should be enough for you guys to just want to check that thing out. So
awesome. Thanks, Mark. I think zero downtime deployments is something we all strive for, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So some things that caught my eye over the past month or so. Mark Stiles, who's a Sitecore MVP, came out with a great post with a fabulous title. The title is DIIOC TDD OMG WTF Why? And I'll be honest, the only acronym in that's really hard to say as an acronym to me is WTF. You really want to use the words there. At least I did.
Isn't WHY an acronym? I completely mistook that then. I'm sorry.
Sorry, man. We can't all be winners.
All right.
Anyway, Mark in this post talks about dependency injection and version of control, and sort of they're really big buzzwords, and people kind of get their shorts all bundled up over them, bunched up over it.
Yeah, they can.
And Mark has a very good take on all of these things and really why they're important and why they don't necessarily need to be as quite a big deal in the community as they are. You should just be doing them, basically. The second one is another Adam Kahn post introducing the Salesforce Connect for Sitecore. So this is really interesting. Sitecore has come out with an official Salesforce connector. For anyone in the community, they'll probably say to themselves, it was the first thing I said to myself, hey, there already is a Salesforce connector. Adam actually addresses that in this post down here. The existing connector is the S4S connector. It's a pretty solid product. I've used it in a past implementation to good success. I guess Sitecore decided, you know, Salesforce is a big deal. We're a big deal. We need something official to connect to. And so they've released it for Sitecore 7.5 or greater, which kind of makes you wonder, since it's 7.5 or greater, I wonder if they were just waiting for MongoDB to be able to do something like this.
Maybe. I mean, it definitely follows the pattern of the commerce connector. And, you know, I mean, there you see things kind of happening in that direction where we're starting to have contracts in place for integration on certain aspects of Sitecore.
Then I think the last thing we wanted to mention is in January of 2015, Sitecore released their MVP list for 2015. Mark, I'd like to congratulate you for being on that list for the second year in a row.
And you as well for three-peat.
Thank you.
And there's a lot of great people on here. Congratulations to everyone who was able to become an MVP, and look forward to talking with a lot of you guys. And there's a lot of good people in here that are just going to contribute to this community.
Mark, as you mentioned, it's my third year, and really the coolest thing I can say about it is really from before I was an MVP to the first year I was, the community was, more on a fledgling. It was growing, right? And now I feel like the community has exploded to the point where some crazy people are putting out a podcast all around Sitecore. And it's really awesome to see that not only is the product itself continuing to push the boundaries and be innovative, but the community around it is embracing that and doing the same exact thing. And that's probably why we're here and why we're doing this right now.
I think it's grown to the point enough where this, there's different channels, there's user groups. Definitely, the channel for this, we felt it was a good time to introduce and see if, the community, accepts this. So hopefully so. We hope to do this for quite a long time. We hope we provide some valuable information, and it's the group of MVPs and the non-MVPs, quite honestly, that are going to help to do that. So this is a podcast really about everyone else but us.
Yeah.
It really is, So.
Yes, please. Less of me.
For anyone who's not sure of where that MVP list is or how to get their hands on it, you can go to sitecore.net/MVP. And right there on the menu on that page is an MVPs for 2015, where you can see they have both digital strategist and technology MVPs listed. Go out there, see who's made the list. If you see them day to day or you know who they are, congratulate them, because it's a really cool honor. And like Mark said, congratulations to everyone who got that. So this segment is called Marketplace Finds. This is where Mark and I are going to take you through some Sitecore Marketplace finds that we've found. If you're unfamiliar with the Marketplace, it's a spot where you can get some modules to add on functionality to your Sitecore implementation, the out-of-the-box stuff you get when you purchase Sitecore. Before we get to this month's Marketplace finds, we're actually going to start with the genesis of what we'll be showing you, which was Sitecore Hackathon 2015. The hackathon took place on January 20th of 2015, which was a Friday evening. Well, I guess it was a Friday evening for me in the Pacific time. It was more at night for other time zones. It was 24 hours of sheer madness, where you basically got a team of 3 people, or in some cases 2 people, and tried to output as much code and create a module for Sitecore. This year there were 3 different categories you could try. It was Best Sitecore Integration Module, Best Business User Experience Module, or Best Development Experience Module. The insane part of Hackathon this year was there was like 36 teams entered, which Mark, you and I took part last year, and I don't remember the exact amount, but I feel like it was closer to like 10 teams last year.
It definitely was. I think I want to say 20, but it definitely was not as many as this year. So definitely a larger group have turned out for 2015, and I assume that they'll keep growing.
Yes, I assume that too. You can actually go to this sitecorehackathon.org and click on the hackathon for 2015. You can see all of the teams. Again, there's 9 rows of 4 columns here. That's 36 for all our math majors out there. It was really a great event. Mark and I really enjoyed participating again this year. We're happy with what we got out. On this page here, you can see all of the submissions are listed here, so you can find out what people did, which is really cool. If you're interested in the community, obviously you're watching this, so you presumably are interested in the Sitecore community. It's cool to see what people had as ideas and what we're able to create. And some of them have made it to the marketplace, which is what we'll be talking about. So we'll definitely congratulate each of the winners. It was Team Uniques in the Best Development Experience module category. They created a module that I'm not going to give away because Mark's going to talk about it in 1 second. Team Bazinga created the Best Sitecore Integration module, where they integrated Sitecore with Azure Media Services. And then Team Admin B one for Best Business User Experience module. They created a Sitecore achievement tracker that incorporated gamification into Sitecore's editor experience, which is pretty cool.
A lot of good stuff came out. We couldn't cover all of these by any means, so we picked out two. And obviously, you know, Jamie will talk about the one that we did. But yeah, there's just way too many to cover. But I would like to, in time, come back to a lot of these and bring them up in this segment. So
yeah, for anyone who participated, if you're not out on Marketplace, but you consider your module to be complete, get it out there on Marketplace as soon as you can.
yeah, and drop us an email, sitecoreexperienced@gmail.com when you do, and definitely we want to take a look and you know we'll bring it into the segment and showcase it. So definitely that's what we're here to do.
That's some good self-promotion there, Mark.
Isn't it? You like how I just snuck that one in? So, okay. Well, let's talk about uniques. Sitecore Pac-Man. Love the name. Right, I was a Pac-Man junkie. What I really like about this, and it depends on how you set up your projects, your teams, but this is a great idea to basically track your Sitecore item changes for deployment. And in lieu of tracking that each item, you can basically have this build your package for you of what has changed. I know a lot of people use TDS, a lot of people use Unicorn. There have been a couple projects where I've been doing this exact thing that Pac-Man does on either a draft email or a piece of paper because of just the circumstance of the project. So to see this come out, I was really happy. I think it's a neat little tool. You guys need to check it out. Definitely worthwhile. I was, like I said, I was really happy to see this. It was a good effort. Good job, guys. Really good job.
Definitely. Congratulations to Team Uniques. That was a really worthwhile package module that you guys created, and happy to be using that. And like Mark said, to stop writing down on paper every item I have to touch, right? So the other module we're going to talk about is called Integrated Dynamic Placeholders, which you can now see on my screen here, put in by some handsome fellows right there.
There's one handsome fella, and his name is Jamie. I don't know who that other guy is. That other guy. No, this is ours. Definitely, we want to do. It's not so much that we wanted to toot a horn here by showing ours, but we threw it up there because we know it.
Yeah, and quite honestly, we came up with this idea out of experience and out of need. Dynamic placeholders are something that a lot of the experienced developers in Sitecore use. When you start getting into the either page editor or experience editor, depending which version of Sitecore you're working with, you soon find a need to have multiple placeholders that are pretty much the same exact placeholder, and so you don't want to have to create multiple versions of each one. You just want one to be put on the screen multiple times. So you have the concept of dynamic placeholders. With Sitecore having both web forms and MVC support, we felt that we should have a module that's out there that does both web forms dynamic placeholders and MVC dynamic placeholders just in the same module. So that was the first thing we tackled. And then the second thing that we really focused on was once you have dynamic placeholders, we don't want the developers to have to create a one-to-one ratio of placeholder settings items to the actual instances of the placeholder that renders on a screen. So if you think about it and you say, okay, I have placeholder X and I'm going to use that 3 times on my screen, I don't want to have to create 3 placeholder settings items, one for each of my representations on the page. I only want to create one. I only want to maintain one. So that's what our module basically does. It allows you to have a one-to-many relationship between the placeholder settings items within Sitecore and the actual representations of that placeholder that show up on a page. I am planning to use it probably tomorrow, to be honest. I will be installing it on my client because right now I have I think, like 10 different instances of the same placeholder setting item, and I want to clean that up. I want to reduce it down to one.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was our module. We had a really fun time developing it, and we look forward to next year.
The funny thing about this hackathon was kind of an excuse for us to get this done. We've been talking about doing this for a long time, well before even the first hackathon.
Yep.
Since you and I met, we've been talking about this. I think you had this idea in your head and you shared it with me, I think, on our first meeting. So, it was a good excuse to, I don't know, stay up, get this thing, together, and get it out there. So I'm glad we did it.
Absolutely. As we do this podcast, I'm sure Mark will refer to his list of things that he would love to get to. This hackathon let us check off one of those things on the list, right?
When you see the lovely image of me again, which we'll put off for a little while because I know people may be eating, there's you'll see the towel over the board. That is the board of shipping. And that's where, I throw down ideas. We have it covered up for obvious reasons. But, yeah, that's how I keep track of things. I should really use a Trello board, shouldn't I? All right, very good.
Let's move on to our featured guest speaker.
Kam Figy is a Sitecore MVP and a senior technical architect at ISITE Design. Kam is the author of several open source repositories in GitHub for Sitecore, including Unicorn and Synthesis. He has dabbled in everything from Sitecore Azure to Gulp build scripts. Please welcome Kam today as he will speak to us about object mapping with Synthesis, why you'd want to do it, how to use it with Sitecore MVC, and how to use it with Lucene indexes. Let's show Kam a little Sitecore community love. Welcome, Kam.
Hi.
Thank you, Thank you for being here, Kam.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. So let's talk about object mapping in Sitecore. As you can imagine, with the Sitecore API, the very first thing you probably learn how to do is, render out a field on a page or access a field on an item class. And as a seasoned .NET developer, you probably would notice that the first thing you're doing is putting magic strings all over the place to access the fields on a template.
Yep.
That's kind of a code smell, and a lot of people are looking for a way to not have to use those magic strings or constants classes or other relatively clunky ways of handling it. And several people, myself included, have come up with libraries that basically allow you to map Sitecore onto plain old C# objects. Generally, they will look through either the Sitecore templates in the database, serialize template files on disk, and use some kind of code generation technology to emit a bunch of C# classes that will compile and have some sort of, libraries to help you convert them back and forth between items, Sitecore database items and mapped item classes so that you can use them. And then the idea is you use your mapped classes in all your code, and your code looks very .NET-like, and your Sitecore remains flexible as Sitecore is, but you don't have to hard code anything.
Nice. And well, one thing regarding that code smell, I tell my wife it's code smell. She never believes me.
So if we want code smells, we should ask you to write our software for us then, huh?
Yeah, I think I can make smelly code. I have no problems doing that, At least that's what I've been told, right, Jamie?
It's true. I used to work with Mark, and sometimes he has a smell.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks, Jamie. So let's talk about, or let's take a look at what you got for us today.
All right.
A little show and tell time.
Let's do some show and tell.
Perfect.
Show me the code. So I have got a copy of Launch Sitecore for Sitecore MVC that I have installed on top of a fresh copy of Sitecore 8 Update 1 that was installed with Sitecore Instance Manager. If you have not used Sitecore Instance Manager, I highly recommend it, especially if you're trying to set up a site to quickly develop on, because it's by far the fastest way to set up a local copy of Sitecore. So, if you're not familiar with Launch Sitecore, I think it's launchsitecore.net, or you can Google it. You have to log in to download a copy of the code, and then you can just install it as a package on top of an existing Sitecore instance. Launch Sitecore is a version of a simple site that some guys at Sitecore came up with to sort of show the features of Sitecore 7 and 8 off. And yeah, it's a handy little starting point when you want something to demonstrate on.
Yeah, very common tool in the arsenal of show and tell.
Yes. It is the north wind of Sitecore. So let's take a look at a rendering on this site. Specifically, the one that is here for the digital marketers, content owners, developers, and network architects. This rendering is called the abstract spot, and it's relatively simple in terms of the way it's implemented. If we go into Experience Editor here, you can see that each one of these here is an abstract spot that's been inserted. Some of them have personalization applied to them, and you can switch back and forth between their variants when it decides to load. It's going to take a second here, but there's different variants of each of these that are switching out the data source. So let's go take a look at the code, because that's the fun spot. So this is the rendering for abstract spot. And as we had talked about earlier about there being magic strings all over the place, this is no exception. This one has a magic string here for icon, title, abstract, learn more. And what's even slightly a little crazier is it actually has a magic object here, which is an anonymous type that is passing parameters that, unless you know exactly what they're named, you'll have no idea what they actually do, or if you typo them with a bad, if you capitalize the max and max width, it's not going to do you any good and will not do anything as far as I'm aware. So
right here, if I was a new developer and I was inheriting this solution, I'd have no idea looking at this code what the difference between an icon and a title and an abstract field are, right? And that's part of the issue you're trying to solve?
To some extent, yes. That there are different types of fields. I mean, you can probably take a guess that, like, for example, icon is probably an image field of some description. But you're right, you don't know exactly what type it is. You don't know what the operations you might have available to you. Like, in this case, max width and max height are tapping into Sitecore's automatic image resizing to, bound that icon to a particular maximum size. But you're right, it would be nice if it was a little more discoverable, like having some IntelliSense here, knowing exactly what you were doing is definitely a bonus. So now that we've seen this, and I think we can probably all agree that it has some code smell involved here that may or may not smell something reminiscent of Mark on a bad day.
Yeah, pretty much.
So what can we do to fix that problem? So let's go and install Synthesis. And it's a very simple process, in fact. All you have to do is go open your NuGet packages installer, go search for Synthesis. And in this case, because we're in an MVC site, you can just install the basic core synthesis if you want, but that doesn't include any of the MVC extensions because this is Sitecore MVC and we want to demonstrate some of its capabilities for Sitecore MVC. We're going to go and actually install the synthesis.mvc package, which depends on all the other packages you'll need, so we'll get those all at the same time.
Okay.
One thing to note about these packages while this is installing, there are there's core packages, so like synthesis.mvc.core and synthesis.core. If you have a project that is a bit more real life than this, where you have several projects like libraries that you use, and those libraries might need to reference synthesis, you could install those core projects. The core projects don't come with the .config files, which you probably don't want anywhere except your web project, and so that would be the project to use there.
So Cam, if people are using older versions of Synthesis, because you just released 8.1, I believe,
yes,
today.
This is 8.10.
First of all, what's the immediate benefit they get, and then what are the pain points of upgrading, if there are any?
So the core APIs of Synthesis have been very much the same ever since version 7. Version 7 did change the generated files slightly. In fact, version 8 actually also changed the generated files slightly, but they're fully backward compatible, so you don't have to worry about an upgrade there. You just regenerate and you'll get the new format. in terms of the general upgrade process, the API Synthesis uses are just, standard template API things. So you don't really have to worry too much about an upgrade breaking. I mean, if you pulled out the content search support stuff of Synthesis 8, you could probably go compile it and install it on Sitecore 6.5 without any modifications.
Okay.
But it does, Synthesis 8 requires greater than Sitecore 7.2 due to some content search API changes that were introduced in 7.2. And we'll get into the content search capabilities of Synthesis a little bit later when we extend something here. So we've got Synthesis installed at this point, and it has a few config files that it has added here. So we've got app-config include synthesis.config. The synthesis.config is a whole bunch of configuration settings for the way the code generator works. So you have to tell it, for example, what templates you want to get generated. You have to tell it what you want your namespaces of your generated items to be. You can do fancy business with includes and excludes on a field basis, including with nutty things like wildcards for included template paths. If you want to exclude fields, you can do crazy stuff like excluding particular template names by wildcard and particular field names by wildcard. But really all you probably need here, these are just some examples. You probably want to keep that one to exclude standard fields, which all start with __, because there are the standard template item that Synthesis comes with has ways of accessing pretty much all the standard fields. So you probably don't want a whole bunch of properties on your object for, __ updated. If this was an actual project, we probably would want to customize some of these namespace settings. So instead of synthesis.model.concrete and synthesis.model, you would probably want to modify that to actually be something relating to your project. So, launch sitecore.model or, something like that. You probably would also want to change where the item output path was. This is web root relative, and you can jump out of the web root. So if you are developing out of the web root, I develop in the web root, so it's not an issue for me. But if you're doing a project where it copies build output into a Sitecore site, you may need to have this do the relative path to the place where you want the model to be stored relative to where you deploy it to. But by and large, the default config out of the box will work. And in fact, we're going to stick with the default config out of the box for this, and we'll see exactly what it does. So if we just run a build, which succeeded, we will go to our site, and Synthesis installs a page that's its control panel, which by default is synthesis.aspx. And if you notice the other config files, well, that's loading up its app pool there. The synthesis.controlpanel.config is where it registers that config file. And then there's also this synthesis.startup.config, because it can do synchronization checks on startup. Like it can check to see if your generated files match the actual structure of the templates that you have inside of Sitecore at this time. And it can either put that in the Sitecore log saying, hey, these are desynchronized. If you want to get a bit brave, you can also have it actually set startup check mode to regenerate, in which case it will try and find the right project and actually regenerate Synthesis for you automatically on startup if it is not synchronized.
Now, on a typical production box, obviously we don't have to worry about regeneration. I mean, everything's going to get deployed up there. So are these things, can we turn these off?
The entire point of having synthesis.controlpanel and synthesis.startup separate is that they are not required in especially a content delivery environment. They're not required ever. So you can set up whatever deployment scripts you have to just delete those files on a content delivery deployment.
Perfect.
And then away goes the control panel and any startup checks, and you have a clean CD instance. You will need synthesis.mvc and synthesis.config for that, because those are actually related more to the presentation aspects of it and the configuration of the APIs that read things.
Okay.
So we've got our control panel up here now. You can see that there's a metric ton of templates that are not synchronized. The reason why that is because the default configuration literally synchronizes and generates a model for every single template that is under Sitecore templates. When you add in all the system templates and everything else, that's quite a lot. You probably will want to limit the number that you have to, make your regeneration time be really sweet, though as you'll see in a second, the regeneration time is actually pretty nice anyway. You can hit details and it will show you a diff view of what exactly is going on with all these 381 templates. So it'll tell you right now, every single one of them is in Sitecore, but it is not in the model and it is not synchronized. So if you had, for example, if you went and took this template and it was already generated, added a field to it, it would show up here as in Sitecore. And it does that by taking basically a hash of all the template fields and their types and other things, and then putting that in an attribute on the model that it can compare against. So it's pretty quick at doing that. So if we hit this regenerate now, it's going to go and generate 381 classes and interfaces for us in 2800 milliseconds, which isn't half bad.
No, that's pretty good, actually.
And because of where we told it to put stuff, if we go back here, we'll have it show all files in Visual Studio so we can see everything. And you'll see that it wrote out here synthesis.model and synthesis.model.concrete.cs. And if we include these in our project, at this point, we now have a model. And if we take a quick look at it here, one thing to really note about synthesis is you almost always want to reference it by interface. So for example, if we see here, I had placeholder setting item, this would represent a template in Sitecore called head placeholder setting. You can actually see it actually puts the XML comments up here, so you'll get some IntelliSense on exactly what is going on. If you're a person who puts help text on your templates, it will actually put the help text as well on here, so you can actually get field level IntelliSense with the XML comment when you access it on exactly what the field is for.
Excellent.
That's awesome.
And then it does inheritance. So because Sitecore can do multiple inheritance, the only way you can really represent that inside C# is interfaces, because you can implement more than one interface, but you can't multiply inherit classes. And so there's an interface hierarchy that represents your template hierarchy. In this case, you can see I had placeholder setting item implements I placeholder item, sorry. And if we go to definition on that, you can see that I placeholder item implements I standard template item, which is basically the base class. Like once you get back to the only template you inherit is standard template in Sitecore, you'll inherit I standard template item, which basically includes all the utility things that you might imagine. So if we go to definition here and realize that we have not set up ReSharper to do the compilation yet.
Well, we needed something in the demo to go, hey.
Yes. This is semi-scripted, but not that much. And I've done it once, and we'll see if it works the same way again. So you can see if we go to standard template item, or iStandard template item here, you've got the standard Sitecore fields, name, display name, some things like searchable content. Searchable content is for the Lucene or integration, or search index integration, where it actually just maps to the underscore content field in the index, which is basically all text fields that Sitecore has indexed on this item. So if you're doing like a site search type thing, you probably will search on searchable content, but you can't actually access it outside of the context of a Lucene search. It's sort of a fake property because there's no equivalent of it outside of an index.
Okay.
And then all these other things, parent ID, template ID, ancestor IDs is another one that it works, but is largely designed for doing content search, because if you want to get all the items that are under a particular item, you would do where ancestor IDs dot contains the name of your site root item or whatever you want to filter by. The other thing to notice is it has some things like for this database here. You'll note that the database is actually of type iDatabase adapter. There are actually abstracted databases, like everything on this property or on a synthesis object can be mocked. So if you want to do testing, you can actually mock the database property with another database adapter. The database adapter returns all synthesis objects, so you'll get iStandard template item back out of it instead of a Sitecore item.
Okay.
And because of that, you can also mock the return, so you almost have like a fake Sitecore API that is completely abstracted on top of synthesis items. So if you want to get crazy with mocking things, creating fakes, you can do that. There is a synthesis.testing NuGet package that has some helper methods for letting you quickly mock up fake synthesis items and setting return types that would be expected for particular things you're interested in.
And we're returning the synthesis items more than a standard Sitecore item, more for performance or just for continuity?
Both for continuity and because it's an abstraction. So if you just returned a standard item, you would be returning something that was dependent on the Sitecore database that you couldn't mock, that you couldn't new up in any way, shape, or form. But if it's basically a parallel API to database that includes the most common things that you're going to use out of it, and basically just, instead of returning an item, returns iStandard template item.
And it allows that decoupling then to be able to do what you need to do from a testing standpoint. Perfect. Okay.
Yep. And from a performance standpoint, it's extremely fast. Last time I tested this, all it does is it just wraps the standard item when you create a new synthesis type. So everything is completely lazy loaded. It doesn't even, get the value of a field off the Sitecore item until you request the equivalent synthesis property. And so, the last time I tested it, I think I made something like, it was either 1,500 or 3,000 items that I wrapped up, and I think it was in something like 5 or 10 milliseconds. So you're not adding appreciable time to your site by using synthesis, because everything is, by and large, going to be the same speed as the Sitecore API. The actual instantiation of the objects is done with a generated code thing called an initializer that is all kept in cache and can actually be called through an interface. So there's no reflection at all involved in creating a new one of these.
Okay.
And here's one here. This is an initializer. Tells you what template ID it knows how to initialize, and then has a create instance method that just returns a new instance of it. So internally, there's a dictionary of these by the ID, the template that it does. When you give it a Sitecore item that you want it to initialize for you, you just grab the template ID of it, match it up to an initializer, and say, hey, initializer, create me a new instance. And it's going to be of the right type. That also has the corollary of, because it is pulling the items out by template ID, that the item is always going to be representative of the template ID that it actually is. So say you have a page item template that inherits from, say, page title.
Okay.
You can say, I want a page, iPage title item, like the base template. But if you went and tried to cast it to page, you could totally still do that, because it's going to be the derived type, even though you didn't specifically request it to be that derived type. And I know that's something that you have to do some extra work on with some other Sitecore ORMs, where they literally take you literally when you say you want a template of type X, and you just get a template of type X. Always.
Yeah, without being able to drill down.
Yeah. The model, all of the types have got their own implementations. So, for example, you can see a few here. Item reference list field would be the equivalent of like a multi-list or a tree list. Rich text field's pretty obvious. Boolean field is a checkbox. And then they all initialize completely lazily. You'll see this lazy field here where it's passing the item field in. And you might have guessed, if you've been looking at this code, that there's also some content search stuff in here. In fact, it can initialize one of these objects. If you notice this method in here, create instance from search,
Yes.
It actually takes basically the dictionary of fields that come back out of the index and maps it up to the synthesis type, which then it reads it out of that dictionary as long as it can. So if you make a search, tell it, you want to search over, iPage item, and do some where clauses on it and stuff, and then access the results somewhere. If those are actually based out of search, it actually will not go and get them out of the database until you access something that it cannot get out of the search index. So like if you access a date field or a text field or something, and those values are stored in the index, it will actually pull them out instead of getting the database item. But then if you access something that, like URL, for example, that will require you to hit the database, it will transparently get the item from the database and give it to you.
Cam, what do you do about naming collisions throughout all of this?
So naming collisions, there's a couple of common naming collisions that are done when you're doing code generation. One of them is because you cannot have a property that is the same name as its enclosing type in C#. For example, if you had a template called article and you put a field called article on it, that wouldn't be valid in C# because you couldn't have the property called article inside the template or the class called article. So there's a whole bunch of novelization stuff that goes into generating this model. So you would get in that situation a property called article1, and that works also through inheritance, interfaces, and things like that. It'll unique the thing up the whole tree.
Okay.
Probably some of the most complex parts of the generation engine is actually the novelization, because it has to keep track of a whole lot of things and what it's named them. And you know what they say about computer science? There's two hard problems: naming things and cache invalidation.
Cam, I know another thing Sitecore lets you do with items is have duplicate named items in the same directory.
Yes.
Your collisions handle that as well, correct?
Yes, they do. So if you, for some reason, feel the need to have two templates with the same name but different IDs in the same directory, one of
Which
them
we
will be
would
called,
not recommend.
Yes, one of them will be called template 1.
Very good.
We've taken a quick look at the model here and what it generates. We've generated a model. Now let's actually do something fun. We'll take a quick side trip here into the web.config for our views. And the reason for this is we're going to make a stop and add the namespace of the synthesis HTML helpers in here.
Now, for folks that are looking at this, is more for IntelliSense and
Yes.
reference.
You can still use the helpers, especially if you have ReSharper. It will actually offer to import the namespace for you automatically as soon as you use one of them. But it's handier if you have it here because you don't have the @using statement at the top of your Razor file. This applies to all sorts of helpers. Like if you're writing your own helpers, throw them in here if you're using them all over the place because it's just cleaner. So now that we've added that, let's go and jump into a view rendering that I have singled out to take a look at. This is a view rendering called Biography, and I can show you what it actually looks like on the front end here. If we go and take a look at Brandon Royal, who we'll pick on because he's a developer, and he's got this little page on here that has his biography and some other sample fields here. It's a pretty standard thing that he's got here. And let's go back into the back end here, and we will take this. It's a Sitecore view rendering, so it does not have an explicit model set. So normally it would get a model type implicitly of view rendering or rendering model. In this case, synthesis.mvc, when you installs it, installs a get model provider that tells it how to act if you request a model of a synthesis type, and just convert the data source item for the template or the rendering, or the context item if there's no data source, into the type that you have requested. So in this case, biography, I happen to have looked in advance and know that it uses a template called, let me look at my notes here, team member item. So there is a field, a template in the back end here called team member, and it's under launch, team member. So if we take a quick look at its fields, we got quote, image, job title, and some inheritance going on here, in which it inherits this title, abstract, and text template that contains that a lot of the pages on this site use. So as you might imagine, because it has this title, abstract, and text, in terms of the synthesis model, it's going to inherit the interface called title, abstract, and text item, which means transparently, we can go here, declare a model type. So it's going to give me the option here to help me bind it by importing this. I'll take its suggestion. So if you look at the namespace here on this IT member item, we have got synthesis.model, which is the namespace that we set up in synthesis.config. It's the default. And then it takes the namespace that is the relative folder path of the item from where you told it the root is. The root in this case is Sitecore templates. So the namespace because it's in the launch Sitecore folder, and then it's called team member is launch sitecore.it member item. So at this point, we've told it we want this item, so let's go clean this up a little bit. In the interest of time, I think I'll actually copy and paste some of this because it would be kind of boring to do otherwise.
Kind of the Martha Stewart special oven?
Yes, the Martha Stewart special oven. So here's what I'll do. I'll duplicate this, and then I'll paste my special oven code in here so we can take a look at the difference between the two of them. So this is what it looks like in Synthesis. So if you take a look here, we've got this text4 extension method that sits in here. And basically, it's strongly typed, just like, you know, text box for other, you know, model-based stuff in ASP.NET MVC. It's getting model passed into it as a lambda. You're choosing what property you want to display, in this case, title. You can see it's strongly typed. If we let it show us what type it is, you can see it as an iText field. You can even see that it is coming from iTitle abstract and text item, which is what we thought it would be because it's an inherited type. Same thing here for the job title and also for the abstract and for the body. You'll note that the body here is type iRich text field, not text field. It is smart enough with the same text4 extension to know whether it's rendering a rich text or a regular text. A regular text it will do HTML encoding on, a rich text it will not. So you have the same standard ASP.NET MVC behavior of automatically HTML encoding all output unless you tell it not to. If for some reason you didn't want to encode a regular text field, you could use html.raw and put out model.title.raw value. But generally speaking, you'll find that you'll want to use the helper methods. So for images, there are a couple of options. In this case, we're using one I brought in Synthesis 8.1 called DPI Aware Image 4. In the case of earlier versions of Synthesis, and it's still in this one as well, if you don't want DPI awareness, and I'll go into that in a second, you can just use image 4. It has basically the same API. You can pass in max widths, max heights. There's actually an overload of image 4 where you can actually manipulate directly the Sitecore image class that does the field renderer for it, so you can manipulate any of the field renderer properties if you want to do like scale and all the other things that are pretty rare to use.
Nice.
So, go ahead.
Oh, I was saying nice. The one question, and for developers who haven't worked with the Experience Editor, these are all friendly going in for Experience Editor?
100% friendly to the Experience Editor. In fact, if you want to turn the Experience Editor stuff off, you have to go and specifically say false on a text field. The second parameter of it is editable. The default is true. There are, I think, image 4. I don't know if you can turn it off for image 4. I think you can. You might have to use the overload that lets you directly access the renderer. So if we build this and go back to take a look at Brandon here. So you can see here now there's two Brandon Royals. One of them is the original code up here at the top, and the second one is down here powered by Synthesis. Same editing abilities. It's actually using the exact same field renderers underneath. But you'll see actually one little minor detail, because there's no space between markup here, you can see that the title is actually jabbed up against the name here. But in the Synthesis version, because the markup is formatted nicely, it's not, because there's actually space between those two tags.
Nice.
So you can see that you can relatively easily, I mean, if you look at the code here, it's more compact to use Synthesis because it doesn't have to use the Sitecore parenthesis stuff. It does not use magic strings. It gives you more abilities like DPI Aware Image 4.
All right.
So let's drop their old code here because we'll actually come back to Brandon later.
We're not going to leave Brandon alone for too long, I take it.
Picking on the guy. So this can also work just fine for a controller rendering. So for example, this abstract spot that we looked at originally, we can go back and pick on that. If we go to, this is a controller rendering. It's getting this model type of simple item from the controller. So if we go to its controller here, you can see some code that I would consider to be kind of a smell. Um, I mean, this ternary is not exactly easy to read.
Yeah, well, it's not terrible.
It could be worse, but it could also
Yeah,
be, with a couple of extra lines, a lot easier to read. You know, like
sure,
an if statement would be a lot simpler to read.
sure.
So you can totally use synthesis with controller renderings as well, and this is where we get into the actual basic Sitecore APIs of synthesis that you can use. I'm going to cheat, paste code in again for my magic oven, import a few types. Basically, you can see that this data source item is the exact same data source item as all these others are using. It's a property on launch Sitecore's controller that gets you the data source item for the current rendering as a Sitecore item. And all you have to do to convert a Sitecore item into a synthesis type is to use this real simple little as extension method. And as soon as you request this, as is a safe method, so you can request a type that it is not. It will not throw an exception. It will just return null. So just like as a null cast in C#, this works the same way. You can also, there's another one called as strongly typed item instead of as a specific type that will just get you the item as basically iStandard template item, which you can then cast if you need to check the type, see if it's a particular type or something like that, or just use as a generic item. So we've created this. It's a slightly different syntax. We're grabbing the data source item, we're casting it, and then instead of doing the ternary on his data source item null, we're doing the same more or less ternary on if the model is null, because now we know whether the actual data source item is the type that we want instead of just whether it's null or not. So we need a view model for this. And let's go and create it, because we are going to be actually passing this template uses actually two different base templates to get its data. One of them is the title abstract and text item, and the other is the rather interestingly named, let's see, what did they call that? General fields item, which includes one field which is called icon.
Nice.
I'm not sure about the naming of that myself, but let's go create ourselves an abstract spot view model. And I'm going to cheat again here because this is a relatively simple thing to paste in.
Oh, it's definitely not cheating. It's the magic oven.
Oh yeah, magic oven. Bam. Magic oven. Look at that. I wrote code so fast. It's that fast, Mark. So this is a simple view model class. It basically takes the model as a constructor parameter, writes it into a private property, and then there is this icon property that basically goes and does a null cast on the existing item to check to see if it is actually a general fields item. If it is, it returns the icon. In my opinion, if I was architecting this from scratch, I would make sure that there were not two different base classes I was pulling from here. I'd make sure that there was, one class, one template that inherited all of them instead of having sort of multiple template composition. But
okay,
this is how I would handle it if I had to come across this situation normally. Make a view model for it, compose the view model of the different template types you need to get access to. So now we should have back here in our single item controller, it's got abstract spot view model knows about it. ReSharper knows that the view doesn't actually want this type. It actually wants a simple item because we haven't changed it yet. So if we go back to this view, you can see it's got a simple item and a whole bunch of magic strings. We talked about this originally.
Yep.
If we go here, I can put in from the magic oven the code that will do it correctly. So you can see here, we're pulling in a different model type, the abstract spot view model that's coming back from our controller. We're using a DPI aware image for the icon and mapping it to 64 by 64, just like it does here. The exception here is that this is actually strongly typed. That's specified that this is a maximum width, this is a maximum height. It's not magic objects. And then we're just rendering out the other text items. You also note here that the URL is just a property. You don't have to use LINQ Manager and all of their shenanigans.
Okay.
And the URL is pretty smart about what it does. If I remove this old stuff, because it's not going to like it if it has 2 models, and run a compile here, and go back over here to the home page and refresh it, We'll see that it magically looks exactly as it did before. Very, very exciting, I know. But we got rid of a bunch of magic strings, and they'll actually break if you change the field name and compile. It'll actually be a runtime error or a build error instead of an error at runtime. So this is all loaded up here. We've got our edit stuff. You can see you've got the same variants, so you can use this. It's just field renders, anything that you can do with XDB. You should be able to do just fine if you're using synthesis. It's 12:30 a.m. It's been a long night.
Now everybody knows our recording schedule.
So, yeah. Now you've got that. That's an example of a controller rendering. One other thing to note about this controller, if you have an array of items, there is also a as strongly typed collection of and as strongly typed collection that mirror the as method. So you can convert a whole set of items into synthesis types really easily. The collection ones are also safe in that if there are any items in your set that cannot be converted to the type you requested, they will be removed from the final set instead of throwing an exception or putting nulls in your set.
Awesome.
That is kind of synthesis using Sitecore MVC in a nutshell. One last thing is the search support. I noticed earlier actually that I am blind and that the function that I was going to implement is actually already present here, specifically showing the related articles that Brandon Royal has written. But I can show you how to do that in synthesis as well.
Okay.
Because it's almost certainly simpler than the code that renders that normally and does not require defining any models at all. So we can go over here to our biography, and you would not do this in a normal site. Just so you know, this is very smelly code. Even Mark will think it's smelly. I will paste in from the magic oven this code.
I don't know how this got to be smelly code in me a lot.
So this stuff is all relatively standard looking content search. The reason why you're adding the results to results list here is because this context, as soon as it goes out of scope, actually releases the index resources, which means that if you try to enumerate over this results variable after context is gone, it's going to throw you a big fat exception. So a lot of times you'll have to use to array, to list, or copy into a results list like this, so that it actually does the enumeration and you get persistence outside the scope of the context. But there's a couple special things about the context. First, you'll notice instead of get queryable, it's using get synthesis queryable. That buys you two things. One of the first off is the default get queryable actually will not allow you to use interfaces. The Sitecore dev team is aware that interfaces will work with it, and I believe at some point they're planning to remove the generic constraint that prevents you from using interfaces on the default one. But for the moment, this actually is sort of a way around that it lets you use interfaces to query against instead of only concrete types. The second thing is get synthesis queryable works a heck of a lot more out of the box like the standard database query. If you'd use get queryable without any parameters normally, you will get every single version of the item, you will get every single language of the item, and you will get if there's multiple databases in your index, you would get multiple database versions of your item. It has basically no filters at all. Most likely, when you're doing a query, unless you're doing it deep in the content editor backend, you probably actually want only the latest version in the context language in the current database. Get synthesis queryable automatically throws those filters on there, so you don't have to worry about it, and you can just write your code and probably not have any wacky bugs as soon as somebody adds a second version of something, and then you get the same result showing up twice. Not that I've ever had that happen.
No, that's nice.
This is doing a pretty simple, it's all strongly typed against the synthesis type. It's an interface that obviously we have not modified since it was created, so we didn't have to go create any models for this content search. And we're just asking for it to find contributors, which is a field on the article, which we already know it's an article because we told it iArticle item, contains the model.id. The model.id in this case is the ID of Brandon Royal's item, or whoever else we look at, but we're picking on Brandon. So we've just basically asked it to go get the articles that Brandon was a contributor on. So then we add it to our results list. We do very simple rendering code that's all synthesis-like, if you'll note. We've got result.url using the URL property like you normally would have. And in this case, I'm using result.title.rawValue because using raw value will make it not have to pull anything out of the index. So these objects will not have to be pulled out of the database to get rendered. So if I save this, let's go run our code smell code here. And you'll see that we've got the Sitecore user interfaces down here, paralleling what's up here that I was too blind to notice earlier already exists.
But nonetheless, a good demonstration.
Yes. And you can see just how quick it is. Like, I didn't have to do any modeling. I didn't have to inherit from anything. I just said, hey, I've got this synthesis type. Give me all the things like this. That's the other thing that it actually does. Because it knows iArticle item represents a specific template, it also filters on that template ID. If you remember earlier, we talked about synthesis having that really, really fast mapping where it would go look up by template ID and use that initializer to basically go at interface call speed.
Yes.
This actually patches the default mapper. The default Sitecore mapper actually uses reflection to map every single property. One of the reasons why they told you should try and be careful of how much items you should pull back out of a search index in the initial release of Sitecore 7 is because as soon as you go to a decent number of items with a decent number of mapped properties on them, as you might imagine, non-cached reflection gets kind of slow when you're doing it, 30 times per template.
Okay.
This actually replaces that mapper with Synthesis Mapper. Synthesis Mapper, as you know, is pretty dang fast, so you can easily go to several thousand items on this without seeing your page load times go up to 4, 5, 6 seconds.
Very cool.
I agree.
Yep.
From a standpoint now, on the wiki you have Lucene as the primary go-to search plugin. And you're looking at Solar down the road.
I am looking at Solar down the road. There are some problems to solve relating to the way that a Solar index field can change depending on some factors that I cannot remember at the moment. But when I looked at it back in the day, there were some hurdles that I was not ready to cross yet to support Solar when I actually do a project where I deeply utilize Solar. That's probably where I will look more deeply into doing it in Synthesis.
Okay. What about other search offerings? Are you looking at those? Are you relying on more community and contribution?
It would be about the same thing for that. I mean, if I needed it for a project, I'd implement it. If somebody else needed it for a project, I'd be happy to take a PR. But, it's an open source project. It's mostly developed in my spare time. So when it comes down to it, it's developed for the things that I want it to be developed for.
Sure.
I'm happy to have it extend beyond that. But, my roadmap is by and large selfish, to be perfectly honest. If somebody else brings up a good idea, I'll certainly add that to the roadmap. But
Cam, how about you've shown us how easy it is to install and sort of generate your classes from scratch. What about if I had an existing project that and obviously, Launch Sitecore was an existing project that you added this into, but what if I had an existing project that already had some classes generated? Maybe I was using a different ORM and now I want to switch over to Synthesis. Do you have any sense on how easy or difficult, what kind of process that would be?
Well, Synthesis generally tries to stay the heck out of the way. So, I mean, I haven't directly tested, every single ORM will live in harmony together, but
sure,
hypothetically speaking, they should. I mean, Synthesis generates its own separate model. It has its own separate extension methods for converting types. it doesn't really touch any of the other things that other ORMs might touch. I mean, I suppose it might be possible for like the MVC Git model pipeline stuff to get into a fight, but that's something that you could resolve by changing around one way or the other to make it work. It's relatively easy to bring in partially. I mean, there's a pretty good sized site that I've worked on where we inherited a legacy code base, brought synthesis in to take some rather special code that was already there and refactor it in some cases. And, you know, it was never a complete conversion, but the parts of the site that we touched, we'd convert, and it worked pretty well. It generally does not, you know, stick its fingers in things. It just is there, and it's something that you can use, but isn't really going to conflict or force you to use it if you don't want to. I mean, every standard template item has an inner item property, so if you want to go get a database item, you probably shouldn't, because it makes you unable to do any testing or abstract you from the Sitecore APIs. But, you know, if you need the inner item for something, you can get it.
Excellent.
Very good. And then another feature that you didn't touch in your demo, but I know Synthesis offers for MVC, is if one of your view renderings has an error, you kind of contain that error within the view, correct?
Sure. We can actually probably show that. Let's see. If I go here and declare the model type on this view rendering to be something wildly... So model dot say list manager, you know, something that obviously is not what it is.
Sure.
iList folder item. We'll have to comment out some of this stuff here because it's not going to actually work. So we'll put something in there. We'll go refresh Brandon, and you'll see that you get this hidden rendering message. Normally this would blow up the page because it's not the data source type that was expected. So you can see we got a model type of team member, which would be castable to the type that we had before. This is the concrete class of synthesis that represents it. And we did not match iList folder item, which is that random type that we chose. So it'll tell you what's going on. It'll show you the exception if you have dynamic debug compilation on. So that's what would have blown up the whole page if you did not have synthesis.mvc installed, which you probably don't want the whole page to blow up just because somebody set an invalid data source in one of your renderings.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that feature.
And if you don't want to use synthesis, but you want that feature, it's literally just a pipeline processor in synthesis that doesn't depend on synthesis. That I think should be pretty easily jackable if you wanted to put it in your own project. It's registered in the synthesis.mvc.config. So if you also hate that for some reason, you can also comment it out.
Awesome.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Cam, for going through all of that. I mean, that's, you know, it looks like you've developed a really mature, lightweight product going forward. You know, we kind of talked about what makes synthesis stand out for you and everybody. And if people want to take a look at this, if people want to download it, use it, contribute to it, where should they go? How should they contact you?
Sure. I mean, if you want to get a hold of me, probably the easiest way is on Twitter, Kamsar, Kamsar. And then it's the same name on GitHub, so it's open source, hosted up there. It's MIT license, which basically means you can go take it, do with it whatever you want, use it in commercial products, change the source, redistribute it without telling me basically anything. So I take pull requests, you know, if you want to contribute back some stuff that you've done to synthesis, or if you have a feature that you want, I would be happy to take your PR. And yeah, you can find the new releases on NuGet.
Now, I know you released 8.1 today, the day that we're recording.
Yep.
You had 8 not too long ago, I believe.
A couple weeks.
Yeah. So as far as your ability to keep up and do new things, and I know this is something you do as you go, as you have time, are you looking at anything in the near future?
Not really. The things that I was looking for in the near future, I rolled into 8.1.
Just for this, or just for other fun?
Both.
Perfect. Well, Cam, it has been great. It's always great talking to you. It was great seeing you again. We haven't talked for a little while. So this has been excellent. I hope you come back and do another episode with us.
I'd be happy to. Thank you
Perfect.
for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for being here, Cam, and thank you for your patience with our technical difficulties and some of our shooting.
They'll never know there was technical difficulties.
No,
Nobody will know there's
we'll let them
technical
know.
Yeah. So, filming ain't easy, folks. Filming ain't easy.
Cam was an awesome guinea pig for us.
and a very receptive one, and we thank you very much, Cam.
Very much.
Hey, thank you guys. You're the ones who invited me to be your first guest. I'm honored. Thank you very much.
We're honored to have you.
If the moose says you're closed, I say you're open.
Hey, I just want to again thank Cam for joining us for episode 1. I know that was quite a lot of information for everyone, so rewind, replay, right?
The beauty of being a podcast and not live.
Exactly. Well, live you can record, but there's a lot of things that have fortunately and unfortunately had to hit the cutting room floor throughout this whole process. We'll be writing blogs about that coming up and the experience of episode 1. So stay tuned for that. You'll probably see them about the same time that this is actually hitting the stage, if you will. This segment, we talk about kind of things happening in the community and just general thoughts, opinions more or less of things going on. So we're going to kind of do a call back to Hackathon. And a lot of people did a lot of great things in 24 hours. And what if we got together and did things with a little bit more time, a little bit more collaboration? During Symposium, during the MVP Summit, actually, I was fortunate to be sitting at a table with Tim Lord, and we were talking about Chewbacca cakes and bicycles and all sorts of other great stuff, and horse heads.
Horse heads, yeah, can't leave out the horse head.
One of the things that he had mentioned when we were having dinner is, he sees the brain power in the MVP community, and he would have loved to have harnessed that brain power to do something for Sitecore. And I think really there's a lot of brain power, of course, in the MVP community, but I think there's a lot of brain power in the community in general. I see a lot of benefit to Hackathon, and I see a lot of fun with Hackathon. It would be great, though, if we had a little bit more collaboration amongst the whole community, maybe for some side projects. I know Mike Reynolds and Sean Holmesby did a little thing at Symposium where they collaborated, and I think that would be pretty cool.
Oh, absolutely, especially when you look at it and you say, well, our featured guest, Cam, he's pretty much done synthesis all by himself, right? Mike Edwards has Glass Mapper out there, and there's just a ton of other things that are out there. But if we all and it doesn't even have to be we all, right? If 2 or 3, 4 or 5 got together and said, what's a problem we can solve? Let's go at it. It would be amazing. Like perhaps field level personalization, something like that. I've waited 4 years for Sitecore to introduce that. It might not be on their roadmap. Maybe that's something we could take charge of.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of problems to solve, right? I know you love field level personalization.
I really do. I'm going to push that button a lot.
For the folks listening, that was the other part of that initial conversation with Jamie, of what we should work on. I would just love to see what the community could do. And, there's a lot of factors to it, right? There's distributed work, which a lot of us do, work remote and collaborate, from across the country, across the world, really. There's definitely GitHub repos that people are contributing to. That's happening, which is all great. It's a matter of time and getting people together and doing that. I'd really like to see a think tank kind of pop up. I think that'd be really cool.
That would be really cool. We've got a Facebook page. We'd love to be the center of that think tank. If people want to use that as sort of a hub to get in contact with each other, please feel free. If you think that's a good idea, use our Facebook page, use Twitter, whatever you can to get in touch with each other. Find someone else who's as passionate as you are about something and make it happen.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, and if when you do it, if you use those vehicles or don't use those vehicles, that's cool. Just, you know, drop us a line. I could give you the email address again, but you're going to see it in like 5 minutes, so it doesn't matter. You know, and let us know. And I will be happy to talk about it and happy possibly to have you come on and discuss it. You know, we're always looking for people who want to share what they've been doing, and definitely that's a great way to get people involved as well. So, yeah, you know, I'm hoping we see a little bit more of that. I think hackathon's definitely a great start. I think it's a lot of fun. I don't know if it's so much fun staying up all night. We took naps. I'm not gonna lie. We took naps.
We're both old.
We're old, so I need my old man nap.
Definitely.
Yeah, but no, I think, you know, there's a lot of good talent. There's a lot of new MVPs. I think there's a lot of new community members. You know, I just think there's opportunity for people to get together and work and do some great things. So
absolutely. And sort of in those same lines, Mark, one of the segments that we didn't have for this episode is our mailbag.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, the reason we didn't have a mailbag is because this is episode 1, and who's going to mail you before you've put out anything yet?
Just creepy people.
And creepy people need not apply. So we've, like Mark mentioned, we've got an email address. You're going to see it on your screen in a few seconds or minutes, depending how long-winded I am. Feel free to reach out to us if you've got a question, a comment. If you want to be a guest on the show, that would be awesome. Please do reach out to us in that vein. And we look forward to reading everything people has to say, and even shoot, my son just opened his door. Sorry.
That's okay. We're keeping it in there.
And even this sucks.
It threw your thought, didn't it?
It really did.
That's okay.
Yeah, it's gone. It's gone.
And you can see how, you know, how we do things around here. That happens to everyone, man.
And Mark's not going to cut this on the editing floor either.
I probably won't.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, no problem. Hey, you know, one day my wife came in before we started, and I said, "Hold on," you know, and then she got out of here, and we were good. So, yeah, we definitely want to hear. We definitely want to hear from the community. Share what the community sends us. You know, we're doing this for everybody else. Like I said, this really isn't about us. It's really about everyone else. We just want to facilitate it and do the channel. And there you go. So,
say hi.
Somebody got up from a nap.
Yep. Yeah. End of nap time.
All
hey,
right.
That means it's like a wrap.
That is a wrap. You got things to do because somebody's not going to wait very long.
It's true.
So,
we will see everyone for episode 2 in, say, a month.
Yeah, probably about a month, maybe not even. So, really good guests coming up. You check our Twitter, check our Facebook. You'll start seeing the stuff coming. Interesting stuff regarding quilts. No, patterns. So, stay tuned for that. It'll be a good thing. So, take care, everyone.
Yeah. Till next time.